but they liked it. The Merovingian, that's a notorious script, very hard to read. If you're a paleographer, well, I don't want to. I've always pity people who work with this kind of script, even though we have a lot of text in it. And this is one of the better legible examples. There's much more that is really illegible. Now, even though, let me move ahead. In Spain, but not immediately after the downfall of the Roman Empire, but toward the higher Middle Ages, so around the 10th century, 11th century, they have a script that we call Visigothic. Some very awkward things are going on. Letters that you probably identify as an A. This is actually a T with a very long bow attached to it. Lots of ligatures. What is a ligature? Does anyone know? A ligature is a connection of two letters. The ampersand that I just showed to you is the example of a ligature. Ligare means to tie together. So here the letters E and T, even though you don't recognize them, I can tell you how the letters E and T are sort of woven together here. They're tied together, so this is what we call a ligature. Well, other characteristics you can read in the text that I handed out. Also, a little bit later, so 10th, 11th century, in southern Italy, they developed this beautiful script, which we call Beneventum. The main characteristic is that it looks very quadratic. And again, certain letter types of letters are very strange for us. The E very often looks like an 8. The S is always straight. So that is not an F, but an S. Well, I hope I don't intimidate you guys with this kind of stuff, because anyone can read any type of script. It's just a matter of familiarizing yourself with it. What is more difficult actually when you want to read text like that is your familiarity or lack of it with the language. So if you want to read medieval texts, you have to know Latin. You have to know it very well. Now, a crucial development in the history of the script, and also yet another bottleneck that I was referring to is blah blah blah. Here, bottleneck, you see, when stuff that gets behind or stuck behind gets lost, is the period of Charlemagne and the Carolingian reforms. Charlemagne was king of Francia, he was king of the Franks. He was crowned emperor in Rome. Here's Rome. In the year 800, Christmas of the year 800, he received the imperial crown from the Pope. And this is sort of a watershed in the history of transmission of text and also the history of scripts. First of all, he decided that he wanted to renew the Roman Empire. He had big aspirations. And in order to do that, he made a general reform of the educational system in his empire. Crucial in that reform were monasteries. He sent out policy and missionaries to all the monasteries of his country, and he gave them very clear instructions as how they should teach children, and especially how they should learn to write and speak Latin. And this created a tremendous surge of the production of manuscripts. A nice example of a manuscript is what I have here. This is not a real copy, but just an explanation of this text. Utrecht Psalter, so a psalm book, now preserved in Utrecht, in the Netherlands, where I come from. Please feel free to look in it. So a tremendous lot of new texts were produced. That's to say, old texts were copied, and the originals went lost, but the copies are preserved. Again, all those texts in this period that existed before Charlemagne, but were not copied during this Carolingian reform into new books, have disappeared. This is, again, a major bottleneck. Other side of the story is that it is thanks to this Carolingian reform that we have the text that we now have. If this Carolingian reform had never occurred, then hardly anything from antiquity would have been preserved nowadays. So, institutional, educational reform and a scriptural reform. That is what Charlemagne instigated. We don't know how deliberate it was, but we do know that from the year 800 onward, people started to write in a letter type that was much more legible than the types of script I just showed you before that had arisen and grown in many parts of Europe over the centuries. People couldn't communicate anymore easily with all those different scripts, so in the wake of the Carolingian reform, they decided to standardize the script, make it more uniform, and they came up with a script that, surprisingly enough, is legible to us. At the end of the development of those individual regional scripts, we have the minuscule script, the lowercase script that we use today. So this is an important part of my talk here. We can actually read it if you like. Is there anyone who wants to give it a shot? So for instance, this word here, commendo, yes, you can read it. Then the next word. Yeah, this is actually T-I. TV. So this is TV, yes. And does anyone have a clue what this would say? Do you see the letters? What is this? O and then U, E. This is an S, not an F. So that is very typical of medieval scripts. They have those horizontal S's. Oves, meaning sheep. So I commend to you the sheep which you have entrusted as for. So some kind of biblical text here. This is minuscule script that we use today, but the story actually doesn't finish here. I can do this in 5 minutes if you remember this. So Carolingian reform was very successful. Many texts were written in that kind of letter type, although here we are with the visibility. But then, when a couple of centuries later, these reforms really started to bear fruit, and many more people had become literate, and therefore also the demand for texts had increased. The script developed that did justice to that demand that people had for text. That's to say, people needed to have more text on smaller space. And parchment was still very expensive, so in order to fulfill the wish to have more text available, people started to narrow down the script. The script became squeezed together. It's getting more horizontal and more uniform traits here already. And as a result of this development, in the 13th century, we end up with a script that is very narrow, very uniform. You can have a lot of text on a very short space, but you will see what the downside is. What is the problem with a script like this? What?
I know what you like to read.
It looks very much alike. It's very hard to read. So what we have actually over and over time all recurring is a development in which scripts are created, and at some point they develop in a way that is maybe efficient, but it's also very illegible, and then something new happens, then they reform it again. So at the end of the Middle Ages, when this was the standard way of writing, the Gothic script, humanists in Italy decided this is horrible, this is illegible, it looks not like nothing that the Romans used, let's return to the script of the Romans. So they wanted to instigate renaissance of Roman culture by going back to the original way of writing. But what they decided to do then is to copy the kind of text that they thought was used by the Romans. They went back to this Carolingian script. They believe this is not the way how the Romans originally wrote. We know that this is not true, but thanks to this mistake of the humanists in the 15th century, we have now this kind of script as the municipal script that we use for everyday communication. Time has flown already, and we hardly have practiced our own paleographical skills, which is a great pity to me. So yeah, I think I mean, if you want to stay here, continue for many hours, but I think that most of you will need to go home. So instead of doing that, I hope you will excuse me for not doing that. I would like to open the floor and give you the opportunity to raise a question. Maybe we can do one question in 1 minute that remains us. Yes?
Why do some fairy tales and other old texts have the giant, big, fancy letters?
Well, why that is? Those illuminated scripts, I mean, with big letters at the beginning.
Yeah, like the beginning.
Yeah. Actually, you see an example maybe here on the last page. Well, this is not what you were thinking of directly, I think.
Yeah, well, the whatever one.
The Benevented script.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I'm not an art historian, and my idea is that this is purely done out of love for decoration and for fun. I mean, text that is very expensive to produce and that has also, as a book, some kind of representational function. If this is a liturgical text, it would be dragged around in a church and people would see it, and people were supposed to be impressed by the beauty of it and by the mysterious shapes of the letters. I think an image like that also fits into the picture like showing off. Display text, coffee table book text have this function. Same as we like to have books with lots of pictures in it. That's, I think, what the analogy we have to think of. One more question, maybe, and then I think we have already to conclude here. We had very interesting questions on the time formulated here in the next one. So, is there anyone of you who wants to bring before your question? Yes? Okay, well, that is a good question. You can indeed tell on the basis of the angle. Again, it would be nice if I could write. Maybe I find a nice example, we draw it, or maybe even I can do it here. So, with the formation of this kind of letter, it is clear to me that the quill with which this was written was held at an angle of, I think, 45 degrees, because you see here that narrow line, the hairline, well, it is so narrow because at this point pen stood at a 45-degree angle onto the paper. And if you draw a line like that, you get this thick line here. So this kind of degrees that you have here determine the answer to as to how they held the quill. Yeah, you can just look at it and you measure it. Yeah. And this is, yeah, maybe let me finish with the last question. Why would this be important actually for historians to know all these details about scripts and how what time they wrote with what kind of animal, and when they used this kind of script in Italy and when not anymore. Why would it be of importance? Of course, there is genuine historical interest that is valuable in itself, but there are also other motives that you could do with this kind of information. Yeah?
It tells us reasons why we now you are in the lab, so it shows us some, not all of them, some lighting.
Yeah? Could you expand a little bit on that?
I don't like. There's certain ways that we write now, or that we're taught to write.
Yes.
All the time, and I don't know.
Okay, so that is indeed what has become clear, I hope, in the story. Now you know where our municipal letter type comes from. Yes, so it explains why do we do that and why don't we write in a different way. But there are more motives or reasons why it's important for us to have at least some people who know about this stuff. Well, let me tell you, or I can think of an answer. So if you want to trace back the history of a certain text, and this is the point where I wanted to talk about my own research with you, it's very important to know at what point this text was produced. So I'm working with a sort of ethology, and it is for me very important to know that this text was produced in northern France in the 9th century, because that tells me how this text actually was transmitted over the course of time, what kind of authors this person may have known when he was writing in a specific monastery in northern France. So it helps us to trace back the history of the text that we have nowadays. So it's not only the script, but also the history of literature that is available to us. I hope this, well, let you think about this answer, and I'm sure that Professor Burley will come back to this question at another point. Thank you very much for allowing me to do this talk here, and good luck with the rest of this class. Goodbye.